and welcome back to another edition of This Week in Christian History. And we are glad to have an opportunity for a bonus episode that we certainly like to bring to folks as much as we can. We are going to learn a whole great deal about a relationship that you may or may not be familiar with. It actually happened with one of the greatest preachers ever, right? George Whitefield, and also with Benjamin Franklin, and how they had this relationship with each other, and a film that is headed its way out that you are getting to hear a little bit about early enough before its release. And we are glad to have Joshua with us. Joshua, thank you for being a part of Sight and Sound Studios. And it looks to me like you are the chief bottle washer who got to do a little bit of all of it. So thanks for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Nick, it's great to be here, and I absolutely love your focus on Christian history. I always like to break that word in two pieces. History is his story, and it's incredible the impact that the Lord has had on the American story. And I'm excited to be a part of Sight and Sound and have us be a part of this 250th anniversary with getting the film A Great Awakening out to audiences April 3rd.
Fantastic. And what a apropos term for Great Awakening, particularly with Whitefield, right? I mean,
Amen. Absolutely.
Fits squarely into that. We have had podcast episodes on all of the major players in at least this first Great Awakening that we've had. We've had a great conversation with. But tell us a little bit about Sight and Sound and who you guys are, and tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got into this role of being the guy we're talking to today.
Yeah. Well, I'd be glad to. Sight and Sound Ministries is actually celebrating its 50th year this year. So 1976, the bicentennial year of our nation, is when the founder, Glenn Eshelman, and his wife, Shirley, started to bring the Bible to life on stage. So we've been bringing the Bible to life on stage in a very, very big way. 300-foot wraparound scenes, live animals. I always like to say where spectacle meets story, that's where you'll find Sight and Sound.
Cool.
And then fast forward to COVID, we really felt a call to, the world has been coming to us and to both of our theaters in Lancaster, Pennsylvania and Branson, Missouri. But we wanted to go to them. We wanted to go to the movie theaters and to the hearts and the homes of people. And so we started to do our own media by first taking our stage productions and filming them with multi-camera and doing streaming them or DVDs. And then we got into making our own original films, starting with I Heard the Bells, which premiered Christmas of 2022. And it ended up being a great success and really affirmed the board of directors here at Sight and Sound to bring the Bible to life on the stage and the screen. And so here we are on our second feature film. It's called A Great Awakening. And our call for Sight and Sound Films is to tell true stories of people and events that changed the world because Christ first changed them. So we're committed to telling true stories that will inspire masses of people out there. So
yes.
Thankful to be a part of this. My name is Joshua Enck, and I've been a part of Sight and Sound for 30 years and have been part of the story development team for about 25 years as a producer, writer, director. And so I wear a lot of different hats, but for this interview, I co-wrote and directed A Great Awakening, which hits movie theaters April 3rd nationwide.
How about that? Fantastic. Right at Easter, right? I mean,
yeah, that's right. What I like about that time frame also is this story is really about the Great Awakening that took place from 1739 to 1770. And so it preceded the Revolution.
Sure.
And so the catchphrase for this film is, before the Revolution, there was a revelation. And so for 30 years, Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield and the Wesley brothers, they took the world by storm and they really hit the streets and the fields with the gospel. And for 30 years, George Whitefield came to the colonies over 13 times to proclaim liberty. And that really created a self-governing people. There's a line in the film that says, first they dealt with the tyrant within themselves and then dealt with the tyrant across the sea, being England. So that 30 years of the Great Awakening is one of the most important events in our history. And there's a man named George Whitefield and his friendship with Benjamin Franklin that was right at the center of it.
Isn't that something? And the thing that I love about what you're saying about the truth piece is we'd love for the end of the story for Franklin to have fallen on his face and
Right.
said, Father God, come and be in the center of my life and let me go out and do great Christianity and be, but he didn't, right? And
No.
that certainly is not so, but that is the truth of what happened. But it doesn't mean though that we're trying to spin it up in some kind of a way
Right.
to make it more Jesus than it really is, right? I
Right.
mean, we're telling about what the truth is, and so you may be this. I mean, Whitfield was a rock star,
Yeah.
when you think about. I mean, the number of people that would have heard him preach is just astronomical,
It
particularly when
is.
you think about it happening in the middle of the 1740s and
I
50s,
know.
right? I mean, I'm not telling you anything, right? But I'm just saying, I mean, it's it's just phenomenal to think about that.
Right.
But
Right.
so I appreciate the fact that you all are trying to say, look, we're not trying to sugarcoat this thing, but
No, we're
it's a
not.
story of what it is,
Right.
and it's real. And I think that gives people comfort when they're watching a film to know that they're not getting, bamboozled one way or the
You
other.
got it. And that's not our heart. We don't have an agenda with this film. We tell true stories. We show the flaws of Whitfield's life. We don't put him on a pedestal and keep him there. In
Hmm.
fact, one of my favorite lines in the film is a showdown between him and Ben Franklin, and they're having a conversation. And Ben, really stirs the pot with George Whitfield and calls out some of his flaws. And George Whitfield says, "Do not base your faith upon your father's cold religion. Don't base your faith upon my flawed life. Base
Mm.
it upon what he has done on that cross of wood." And so we feel like telling true stories means exactly that. We want to show the flaws in these people, but that doesn't make them any less heroic. It actually makes them more heroic, and like you said, gives us permission as viewers to enter into this world because we are all flawed human beings. And we certainly aren't out to prove or disprove Ben Franklin's faith.
Mm.
There's a famous quote that he said when he was confronted about the Jesus question, and he said, "If I were to ever have this born again experience, I would never give you or anyone else the pleasure of knowing it."
Right.
So he was a very proud and stubborn man. And that's so this film is not to try to prove that he was or wasn't a believer in Christ, but I will tell you this, and you have to see the movie in order to see what happens. But it all culminates this friendship between Whitfield and Franklin, which is incredible. That the colony's greatest printer and communicator, Ben Franklin, and the world's greatest evangelist came together for 30 years and
Mm.
promoted the greatest awakening these colonies have ever seen. Like, that is just incredible that the Lord put those two men together, right? And
Right.
so that's the story starts there, but then it leads to and it culminates to this moment in history that we have got to hear again. Ben Franklin addresses the Constitution at a pivotal time in the forming of the country, and the words that he says, word for word, we depict it in the film. We don't take any words out. We don't add any words for drama. It's exactly what he said. When you hear those words of what he said on that day in June, I think that the nation will be shocked and shaken and inspired by what that founding father, the most celebrated deist, had to say about
Right.
providence and God.
Right. Right. Isn't that great? Well, how did you guys uh, figure out this story about
Yeah.
the two of them? I mean, I would say for even rank and file history nerds like myself, until somebody else comes along and has told us something about that, I don't know that as many people would even really know that that interaction happened. So, how
Yeah.
did that end up being from some, hey, oh, was it a hey, by the way conversation? These two actually
Right.
interacted, or was somebody in the middle of doing some research and it popped up, or
Yeah.
how did it get to you guys?
Yeah, no, great question. And I did not know anything about George Whitfield, but my writing partner, Jeff Bender, was a huge fan. In fact, it's one of his favorite people in history because George Whitfield was actually had aspirations to be a great actor in England. He had
Hmm.
this powerful, anointed voice that would just soar above anything else without any amplification. And so being a theater, and projection and having
Sure.
actors learn, that caught the attention of my co-writer, Jeff Bender. But then when Whitefield went to Oxford to study
Hmm.
acting, that's when he ran into the Holy Club and he had a born
Hmm.
again experience. And that's when he used the voice that God gave him to preach to the masses and not from the stage. He went from the stage to the pulpit. And so that intrigued my writing partner for years, but I never really personally thought of doing a story on Whitefield. I was pursuing, upon the success of I Heard the Bells, I was pursuing the second original film, and I knew I wanted it to be about liberty, God's definition of liberty.
Hmm.
And I was studying it, and I knew our 250th was coming up, and it takes us 3 years to produce an original stage production and film. And so this is years ago that I was on this, and I thought that I was going to do a film on George Washington,
Hmm.
and I still may someday. But I kept hitting creative roadblocks,
Hmm.
and I was very frustrated actually. And my
Right.
wife, she said, just get away a little bit and focus on the story. She could tell I was hitting roadblocks. So me and my dog went to an Airbnb in the middle of Pennsylvania, and I was just praying and poring over the opportunity that we have to make a second film on liberty. And in the middle of that time, I was praying and I felt like the Lord spoke to my heart, like very clearly, which has only happened several times in my life. And as far as it being this audible, said, Joshua, you had the word, you had liberty right, but you had your Georges wrong.
Mm.
And I started thinking of George Whitefield because I was looking into Ben Franklin and the preachers of the time. And here's the really crazy part. And I call these breadcrumb trails of faith. I think
Hmm.
of like all these little moments where God showed up to point us in directions. A year earlier than that moment, I was at Oxford University in England. My daughter's studying English literature there.
Wow.
And we were taking a walk and we went into a chapel at Pembroke College at
Okay.
Liberty University. And I was standing in the chapel and I saw this marker of George Whitefield. And I felt compelled to call my writing partner, Jeff Bender. This is before I even thought of doing a film on George
Sure.
Whitefield.
Because you knew he was a fan, right? And so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just
I knew
like
that he
you
was a
run into,
fan.
all right, you run into somebody who you know is a fan of some
Right.
football team and go, hey, guess what? I just ran into Terry
Bingo.
Bradshaw. I know you're a big Steelers fan. I just want to tell you about it. That kind of a thing, right?
That's exactly what happened.
Okay.
It's well said. And so I called him. It was like 6 in the morning here in the East Coast. And I put it on speaker. I said, Jeff, I'm standing in the chapel of one of your heroes. I was like, I feel led to ask you to pray. So I put
Huh.
him on speakerphone and he prayed a prayer. And my daughter captured it on audio. And he prayed for another awakening in this nation.
Mm.
And that was just a seed that was planted. A year later is when the Lord really spoke to me and said, I want you to do a film on liberty and using the relationship between Ben and George to tell it.
How
And
about
that's what
that?
galvanized it. And something that I do is I try to refrain from other people's interpretations of the story. And
Okay.
so I go pretty solo with it and just do a lot of my own, Googling and research. And I just kept finding incredible facts between these two people that you could make 3 films out of this story. So,
Sure. Sure. And really at this time frame, if I've got it, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Franklin, while he's certainly hyper famous, Poor Richard's Almanac, the whole nine
yep.
yards, and the printer and the thing of what he's done, he hadn't hit the big strides on the electricity piece yet. He hadn't hit,
Right.
and so he's still got
Yeah.
more fame coming his direction, and even after all this. So knowing that during kind of this, I don't want to call it his formative years, but
Yeah.
in a spot where he hasn't moved up to this next plane of being famous, there's got to, I mean, as he went on and did other things and all the role that he played, this relationship back to
Yeah.
back to Whitfield has got to be a big component, you would think,
Oh,
in his
yeah.
life going forward, right?
Yeah. I mean, no pun intended necessarily, but their relationship was electric. It just
Yes.
was. I mean, Ben Franklin saw something in George Whitefield that he couldn't explain because Ben Franklin was a man of science. He was a
Hmm.
man of evidence. He only believed something if he could tangibly prove it and see it.
Right.
And then here comes along this phenomenon called George Whitefield, who is literally turning the world upside down with his fiery theatrical preaching. And Ben Franklin is seeing people's lives changed because of it, and he can't put it together. And so there's a famous quote where Ben Franklin actually says, "The whole world has gone religious." Like he said, I can't walk through downtown Philadelphia without hearing fathers singing hymns inside the homes with their families. And so he was, obviously interested by the evidence of the impact that Whitefield had. And I think it's what drew him together. I also think there was a business strategy to it. I think that
Sure.
Ben was an opportunist and he was a
Right.
printer. He was the most prolific printer, I think, in the times of the colonies. Um, and so when those two came together, it was just like a perfect marriage as far as getting the word out on a
Right.
movement.
Right.
Something else that I found that is one of my favorite little facts, and I don't even know where I found this, was Ben Franklin was born the 10th son of a candle maker
Hmm.
up in Boston. And because he was the 10th son, his father set him apart as like a tithe, and he wanted him to be a preacher, and actually sent him to school to be a preacher, which didn't last very long. Ben Franklin ran away in his teenage years and came to Philadelphia. So Ben Franklin, he confessed that he ran away from his father's faith, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if he ever stopped believing in God, but he ran away from the faith of his father only years later to be the greatest promoter of the greatest awakening these colonies have ever seen.
Right.
So here he is promoting the very thing that he ran away from
Right.
and made him a very wealthy man. I
Sure.
mean, the journals, the private journals of Whitefield that he sold as collections made him a lot of money. But it's interesting you brought up the electricity piece because that did start in the 1750s, and it was around the time that him and George Whitefield would have been friends. And so we depict that in the film. We actually did something fictional to help create their friendship in the film, and they
Ah,
go out together into the storm, and
ah,
Ben teaches him and shows him what he's been up to, and it's such a cool moment because Ben Franklin in our movie looks over at George Whitefield and he says, "You are the lightning bolt, George. I am just the lightning rod." And
mm.
then George Whitefield asks a question, "But who is the source, Ben?" And so that's a question that Ben can't answer at the time, but it's kind of the question of the film, and it follows Ben throughout his journey.
Right. I mean, it's just like throughout history, you never know what the Lord's going to use when somebody it may have been Franklin's uh, 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 knack, and certainly that he had to go, there's a moneymaker right there.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm smelling that. Okay, and so that may be the thing that got it driven towards that, but how the Lord ends up using that is
Yep.
another whole, has nothing to do with you or me or anybody else, right? It always knows
Exactly.
how that fits.
Yep.
But there had to be, excuse me. But do you imagine that because of the intellect that Franklin was, if Whitfield was not able to do give and take and kind of spar at a level, if you will, that the respect beyond just a printing job
Yeah.
may not have been, and we're pontificating, right? But I'm saying
Sure.
it may not have been this long enough of a relationship where Whitfield was not coming down with the "thou shalt better be believing this or you're going to be in trouble," and
Right.
but yeah, I'll spar with you up here. Okay, let's
Yeah.
have this dialogue and conversation. There had to
Yeah.
be, I would think,
Hmm.
right, some kind of a
Yeah. No,
piece
that's a
to that.
great question, great insight, and history actually gives us the answer to that
Ah,
question. There are letters that exist between Whitfield and Franklin, where Whitfield is begging Franklin to consider his eternal life. In fact, Whitfield congratulates Ben in this letter of his scientific um, success with electricity, and he uses it and says, you know, the same passion that you're pursuing electricity, you should pursue this born again experience. So we know that Whitfield was very bold with Ben Franklin, and Ben would, respond with, I thank you for caring so much about my eternal life and all of that." But Ben was on to other things, and so
mhm.
that was enough information for us to really move toward that topic. And Whitefield does confront Ben about his faith and asks him about Jesus Christ in this film. And the
Huh.
response that Ben gives is phenomenal, and grounded in truth. And so, like I said, we didn't set out to try to prove or disprove the faith of Ben Franklin. We're
Right.
simply telling a true story of the most unlikely friendship that led to one of the greatest events in our nation's history and a monumental speech that Ben gave on a specific day when our country was very divided. And so
Right.
it's just the stuff that movies are made of, to be honest. It's incredible.
Right. 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 And particularly when anybody that might try to separate out what the Great Awakening did for the revolution and what it did in the minds of those people who were, whether they were on the committees of correspondence or whether they were members of the court, the Continental Army, or whether they were
Right.
members of the Continental Congress. It didn't, I mean,
Yep.
the impact that it had, the Great Awakening, this first one, right, and how all of that
Yep.
ties in such a way that tips it in such the way that makes it
Yep.
to try to separate that out. I think you would not be um, uh, fair to what is the reality of what actually took place
Right.
in that. I mean,
Well, Nick, you're
right,
absolutely right. And actually, I would say the impact of the First Great Awakening is still happening today. Look at our conversation and look at the people who are going to hear this conversation and the documents that were formed, after there was a self-governing type of people. In fact,
right,
some of the founding fathers said, we are so moral that we don't need laws. Like they actually said that at a convention. It's like, no, time out. I think we do need
time,
a judicial system. But they had a 30-year period of time, which is like a biblical definition of a generation. So an entire generation was soaked in this awakening that shaped the moral and ethical code and belief systems of an entire people called
hmm,
Americans. And that's what preceded the revolution. So this film is the revelation that occurred before the revolution. And that revolution was really a group of Americans who have been soaked in this awakening, whether they were Christians or not, they were still
right,
under that impact.
right,
And they dealt with a tyrant within themselves, and then they said, "Wait a minute, we believe." I have it written down here. An entire generations of Americans have come to believe that liberty is not a gift given to them by a king, but a right given to them by God. We've all heard that before, and this
right.
film really amplifies that message. They became a moral, self-governing people, not a perfect people, but they had the stuff that it took to start the revolution and become an independent nation. That is still being experienced today. Through
Sure.
all of our woes, there's still that incredible DNA that exists in this nation that was founded upon a self-governing people that had a moral and ethical belief system.
No doubt, no doubt about that. And so there's particularly for those folks who like to, I think, inaccurately say, well, we're a nation that was actually founded absolutely as a Christian nation. Meh. We
Right.
got pockets that certainly did that, right? And there was kind of this underpinning. It certainly wasn't Buddhist, okay? It certainly wasn't,
Right.
anything outside of that. But to think not everybody was a pilgrim. I mean, that was
Yeah.
coming over to be able to seek religious freedom, right? There were people that
Yeah.
were coming over just to make money, right? To
Right.
be able to come and have a better life for themselves.
Right.
But by having that underpinning, that certainly fits within the framework of Christianity, and to know that is our basis of where we come from,
Right.
that I think is very true, right? And so
Yeah.
you could use examples of these two that we're talking about that kind of fleshes out maybe
Right.
both of those sides of kind of
Right.
still being able to come together and being a thing to be able to create something like
Right.
a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution or a Bill of Rights or other things
Right.
like that they wouldn't do otherwise. So
Right. Yeah.
I'm
No,
going
I
to
agree with
preach it
that.
now, Joshua. I done went to preaching, okay? Instead
No, I like this conversation a lot. I've been feasting on it for the past 3 years, and it's fun to be able to talk about it and how it's impacted the movie that we made, A Great Awakening, coming to theaters April 3rd. And like I said, there's no agenda to this film. It explores this incredible friendship. And the conversation about being a Christian nation, I think, is the wrong conversation.
Mm.
I think that this country really is defined by liberty, and it's the biblical definition of liberty. And I love the book that Os Guinness wrote called The Last Call for Liberty. And he talks about everybody wants freedom, everybody wants liberty. They just have different definitions of it. And
Yeah.
he really brings us back to the biblical definition of liberty, to be set free from something in order to then do something,
Right.
for mankind. But, Christian or not, I think that, and this will make you laugh, but I think that like the Judeo-Christian values that found their way into the law systems of this government are kind of good. Like we really shouldn't murder. We really shouldn't
You're
steal. It'd probably be a good idea to not covet, your neighbor's wife.
right.
Like don't we all think that those are good rules to have? So
Right. Right.
Christian, or not, like there's just a really good foundation that
Right.
the Lord's established with the nation of Israel with these Judeo-Christian values that just work. And
Right.
so this film explores a little bit of that. But what this film really explores is the global impact that the Great Awakening had in the colonies in 1739 to 1770. And I think it's time to get George Whitefield back in the pulpit again today. So
There we go.
that's my prayer and hope.
Well, that's a great way for us to cap off our time to be able to talk today, too. So, where do I, when the movie is released, besides me checking my local theater to figure out where it is playing,
Yep.
how else might I be able to tap into the movie if it's not necessarily coming to my local theater or some other spot to do? Is
Yeah,
there?
well, it should find its way into your closest town or city. It's being distributed by Roadside Attractions. They were the same distribution company that put out I Can Only Imagine years ago, and they're affiliated with Lionsgate, and so it should
Hmm.
find its way into most movie theaters. But you can also go to agreatawakeningmovie.com or sight-sound.com. But if you just Google A Great Awakening movie, you will absolutely find the trailers, and our Instagram and Facebook pages are very lively and active. I'm telling you, the energy that is stirring is incredible with this. It seems to be really hitting the right buttons for people who are hungry to learn some of our American history that we haven't learned, yet.
Right.
So I think for parents to bring their families to see this film is really important, that they have some insight as to the founding of this nation from a spiritual lens that's based in truth. And so, but yeah, a great awakeningmovie.com. Spread the word April 3rd. We're really excited for Sight and Sound to send out its second feature film.
Well, we're grateful that you would take the time and the energy and the effort and the resources to be able to get this together. Thank goodness there are people like you that have an ability to tell the story and understand how to get to some points that are pieces that are really would make this impactful. We don't need another biography on Benjamin Franklin, right? I mean, there might be some more and that might be fine or, whatever. But the story of how they interact really makes this cool. So,
Yeah.
Joshua Enck, thank you so much for spending time with us today and giving us some insight into this fantastic movie, A Great Awakening, that is going to be showing soon. And hopefully, folks will continue to be able to pour into the movie theater and be able to watch even more of that so that you guys can go back and make some more
Yeah,
to
we're
do
already
that
working
too.
on the third one.
I
So
love it.
thank
I
you,
love
Nick. I
it.
appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. God bless you.